Hello again and welcome back to another video. Today we're going to be doing something a little bit different from my usual stuff because today is the first day of CoSy. What is CoSy, you may ask? It's the Costube Symposium, which is basically just like an online convention. That means this weekend a bunch of costuming YouTubers are going to be releasing a ton of special content for this event, including videos like this one, live streams, panels, and so much more. I will link the official CoSy Instagram and Facebook down below, as well as the playlist where you can watch back all of the YouTube content for this weekend, and that will all be up going forward into the future. Make sure to check out the link in the description to claim your badge for this video. Badges are basically like little digital collectibles that you can collect this week and the week after CoSy, so you can show all of the fun things you did. So today we're going to be talking about something that is very near and dear to my heart, which is embroidery. And I love embellishing my cosplays and historical costumes with all different types of embroidery. Well, I thought it would be really useful to tell you guys some of the ways you can do that as well. First, let's define some terms. I'm using embroidery as sort of a blanket term to describe lots of different types of embellishment that involve stitching onto your garments. I'm including things like beading under this umbrella because I think the two pair together very nicely. To get this out of the way, machine embroidery is a type of embroidery that involves digitizing a file which will then be stitched onto your fabric through a machine. I don't know how to do this. I don't have an embroidery machine, so I will not be talking about it very much. Hand embroidery involves a variety of different stitches that are done to create a pattern or image onto your fabric. It's often confused with cross stitch, which is done through little X's, little stitches that are X's, but embroidery is not limited to just that, and you can do a ton of different stuff. And I will link a few videos about the different types of stitches and where you can learn them down below. Next, we have embroidery floss, which is what is typically used for hand embroidery. It looks like this, and it is made up of 6 strands of thread that are woven together, and you can separate these to do finer details and work with less thread at once, or you could use all 6 for a much thicker approach. A skein is what embroidery floss is sold in, and they come in a variety of different sizes and colors. Beading is an embroidery technique that involves stitching beads onto your fabric to create designs and patterns that way. It allows for a very different texture, sparkle, and a very different overall look than you get from traditional hand embroidery. There are many different types of beads you can work with, but my favorite is seed beads, which are these little tiny glass beads, and they come in a multitude of different sizes. Goldwork embroidery is another type of embroidery that I consider much closer to beading than to a real embroidery. It involves stitching down tiny little pieces of metal to your fabric to create a pattern. And there are several different types of wires and threads that can be used for this, but my favorite to use is bullion. Bullion is little tubes that are created by using little tiny coils of metal wire, and it comes in a few different sheens and textures, including smooth pearl, which is shiny, rough pearl, which is matte, and then this one is called check pearl, and it's done in a different way, and it makes it kind of spiky and really catches the light well. There are many other types of embroidery and terms that I will not be discussing in this video, or else we would be here all day. Embroidery can be used to add detail and interest to almost any costume. One thing I like to consider when adding embroidery is the type of person that would be wearing this garment. A poorer or working class person, or even like an adventuring character, would not have the same luscious, rich designs that an upper class royalty character would. And that's not to say that you shouldn't include embroidery on characters that are meant to portray classes other than the upper class of royalty. Many different real-life cultures owned embroidered garments that were worn by all walks of life. I'm just saying that you should try to consider what story you'd like your finished garment to portray. If you're doing this for cosplay, adding embroidery generally works better for animated characters than for live action. And this is because live action characters already have all of the texture and detail that you see on screen that the designers had to add in order to make the costumes look lifelike and not flat. A good example of this is the embroidery that is used in Game of Thrones, which I personally have recreated before. They used embroidery to add a bunch of detail, texture, and tell stories about the characters that are wearing the garment. Animated characters, specifically 2D animated characters, don't really have the same level of detail because it would be so difficult for the animator to draw that over and over and over again. CGI characters don't necessarily have the same restriction. As you can see in Anna's outfit from Frozen, you can see the individual stitches and the embroidery on her bodice design. But if you compare Anna to an image of Belle's ball gown, for example, even though this gown is supposed to be fancy and for a much nicer occasion than Anna's traveling outfit, it still is a lot flatter and lacks that amount of detail because of the restrictions of 2D animation. But though I'm not trying to make a quality judgment on either type of animation, I just mean that there's more room to explore in Belle's ball gown than Anna's dress because she already has that detail built into her outfit. For cosplay, it can be super easy to add embroidery. You just have to look anytime a character has a pattern or a design on their outfits, you can just swap that out with an embroidered design. If you have a really basic costume like a lot of animated characters do, adding detail through embroidery can really ground it and bring it into the real world. In my opinion, the easiest place to embroider is around the edges of costumes. This includes the neckline, the hem, as well as the sleeves. You can do super simple embroidery patterns around them or even just straight lines, and that will add a lot of interest and detail. Another great place to embroider is the seam lines of the outfit. Since it is already formed to your body and intended to look good the way that it is structured, adding embroidery along those lines will just help emphasize them and help emphasize the shape of the garment. Another method I use is all over patterns. This could be just a really simple spattering of beads or sequins or even little tiny embroidered designs. This does take a super long time to execute depending on how big the amount of fabric you're trying to cover is, but it really adds a ton of detail to the costume in a way that just doing it around the edges or in specific places doesn't. Replicating existing embroidery can seem difficult at first, but it's really not that bad. My favorite way to start is to look at all the different materials that are present in the embroidery. For an example, we're going to be using this dress that was worn in Game of Thrones Season 5 by Sophie Turner playing Sansa Stark. I call it the wolf gown, but it doesn't really have a name. I have replicated this design once before, and while it is perfect, I think I did a pretty good job. So in this design, you can see that we have some embroidery thread, several different sizes of faceted seed beads, and the faceted just means that they have sharp edges as opposed to the rounded shape. We also have some shell sequins, as well as some Goldwork bullion. After we've identified all these materials, we can begin sourcing them. I personally like to get most of my beads off of Etsy. I don't really have a good bead store around me at this point in time, and Etsy has so many sellers from all over the world, and you can really find anything on there. It's really helpful on Etsy though to know specifically what you're needing. So for my example, I would look for faceted black seed beads for one of these types. And then once I find a shop, they often have similar products. So I could find the black ones, and they also have bronze, and they also have the same beads in a slightly different size. So there I can get a lot of the things that I need for this costume. I do recommend going to a craft store or physical bead store before you search on Etsy, just so you can get familiarized with what the terms are and what the sizes look like in real life. Seed beads have kind of strange sizes like size 10, which if you're looking at a computer doesn't really translate well to real life. So if you go in person, you can figure out exactly what size you need, even if they don't have the specific color or shape that you're looking for. Once you have everything gathered, you're ready to start. Breaking down the design into smaller chunks really helps. For example, I started with the outline of the wolf, and then worked on the head and then the tufts of fur and finished the entire wolf before adding the sequins and the little branches that are coming off of it. As long as you reference your images often and build up slowly, it's really not that difficult. I like to do one material at a time so you can kind of make sure you've covered everything and you don't need to like go back and add more later. But it's really up to you, and whatever you do, it's gonna look pretty good. Even if your embroidery is a little messier, it still looks more homemade and looks more grounded in reality because of that. It just adds a little extra texture. My main tip for designing your own embroidery is to pick a motif that represents the character or the type of vibe or mood that you're trying to represent in your costume. For an example of a cosplay, we can look at my Anastasia kokoshnik. It's a traditional Russian style of headdress. I did look at historical examples of kokoshniks to see if that kind of would help me, but they didn't really represent the mood I was trying to convey with this costume, which was leaning more fantasy and whimsical than historical. Instead, I looked at the scene it was in. In the Once Upon a December sequence, Anya is dancing around the ballroom, and these swirling lights are kind of forming visions around her of her past. So with my embroidery, I tried to represent that light effect and kind of the swirlingness of these lights with the shapes of the beads. For a historical example, we can look at my winter Regency gown. For this one, I did call it my Bridgerton gown, but I really just wanted to do it separately from that, and that was just a great excuse to get it done. But since I wanted to shoot it in the snow and in the winter, I wanted to use a motif that really represented that. So along the neckline, I embroidered some snowflake designs so that it would reflect the environment that I was shooting in. These are just two examples, but once you have the motif, you can move on to deciding where you would like to put it. Now, if you have really limited time, I highly suggest placing it around the neckline. It's where most cameras view it, hence this shot right here, as well as where people will be looking most often. So it will get the most notice and it will be the most effective for the time that you have. Another really great location to place your embroidery is along the hem. Bodices and tops often have a much more interesting seaming and detailing built into them than pants and skirts do. Adding some embroidery around the hem will help add a lot of detail around the bottom of your costume and draw people's eyes across the entire costume and not just focused on the top. I recommend looking at trims for ideas of how embroidery can be replicated along the edges like hems and necklines. If you want your embroidery design to look luxe and detailed, I recommend using a variety of techniques. This can be several different embroidery stitches, or embroidery and beading, or beading and goldwork, or goldwork and embroidery, whatever works. But having those different textures and materials will make the costume look a lot richer and more expensive, even if you didn't necessarily have to put in extra work. If you're just replacing a bead with a stitch, then it's not really doing that much more or less, but it adds a lot to the costume itself. In contrast, for characters that have more humble sources, using just one technique or material will help make them grounded in that reality and help portray the story that you're looking to tell. A simple straight stitch around the hem or the edges will add a lot of detail and still help with that story. Another great thing you can do is add faux stitching across the seams. That way it looks like it was really roughly put together and kind of rugged, but you still have the structure of your real seams underneath. Down below I've linked some different resources to a bunch of different types of things that I have talked about today, and I encourage you to go check them out if you are looking to get started. Unfortunately, if I described every type of embroidery and showed you every type of embroidery, we'd be here all day. So links down below for more information. But I hope this video was helpful. If you have any questions, please make sure to leave them down below. And I'd love to see your embroidery. So if you are adding anything to some costumes coming up, please make sure to tag me. And all the other creators for CoSy are going to be down in that big playlist, as well as on the social media like the Facebook and the Instagram. So I really encourage you to go check out the other events we have this weekend. And don't forget to grab your badge for this video, again, down below in the links. If you liked this video, please make sure to give it a like and subscribe down below if you'd like to see more of me. Okay, have a great rest of your day. Okay, bye!